giving you the insider takes and the big picture view on the Dogs. This is On the Beat, presented by Ingles with DawgNation insider Mike Griffith and Cody Chaffins.
Happy Monday night to you. Cody Chaffins and Mike Griffith with you on the beat, as we are every Monday night. Got a jam-packed show for you. A little bit of everything tonight, but the most important thing, Mike, you're back home finally. You've been quite the traveler recently.
Yeah, it was a long road trip. The combine always kind of wears me out. You got 14 dogs there going back to back to back. And, of course, Kaylee Manziel was down there lugging that camera equipment down. We were asking a lot of questions, talking to a lot of people, covering a lot of ground. It was interesting to see how the Georgia Bulldogs fared. I was a little disappointed. We had a couple dogs that didn't work out, but the ones that did, I thought fared really well.
Yeah, we've got a lot going on there. There really is no off-season on the beat, it seems like. We got a lot to hit today. We'll talk a little bit of combine, but kind of in a different way than you heard. Coming up a little bit later, SEC Network analyst Chris Doering going to join the show, and he and Mike kind of hit everything, a broad perspective of what's going on in college football. Really interesting stuff to hear from him, talking about the changes coming with spring games and salary caps and all of that. But like I said, we're going to start with the combine today, and not necessarily where we think Jalen Walker is going to be mocked to go this time, because we've kind of hit all of that ad nauseum over the last week, talking about the guys who were in the combine and what that tells us about their NFL futures. But today we're going to kind of hit it from your conversations, Mike, with all of those guys, what you took away from that to learn about this year's Georgia team. Not necessarily the NFL guys, but they get a lot more open when you get to talk to them in the combine setting when they've got UGA kind of in the rear view.
Yeah, they really do. I mean, it's not necessarily the company line. Now, that's not to say these guys still don't represent themselves in Georgia really well, because I think they do. I mean, I think that you really see the character and the quality of these guys and who they are and what they've become in the time that they've worked under Kirby Smart, making it through the program. I was really impressed with all their presentations. I know a lot of those people, I know a lot of the fans watching have already looked at our DawgNation YouTube channel and seen all those different interviews with all the Georgia players at the NFL Combine. But, I thought Jalen Walker and Mykel Williams did represent themselves really well on the first day. Again, I was a little disappointed they didn't work out, but I understood where Mykel was coming from. He wanted to rest that ankle. It turned out he'd played at less than 70% all year long. I think NFL teams took note of that. He was really good against Texas, but there were some games where he didn't seem like himself. And then Jalen Walker, I mean, this guy's only been a full-time starter 1 year, and you think about the hybrid role that he played with the Bulldogs and how much value that's going to hold in the NFL for a lot of these teams that are going to be looking for Jalen to maybe play 2-3 different spots. That position versatility that Kirby Smart talks about really paying off for these guys.
All right, so we'll start kind of here with what we learned about Kirby Smart, because you talked about all the interviews are on our DawgNation YouTube channel. Feel free to check them out, but we kind of hit you with the cliff notes here, especially concerning this year for Georgia. What we pulled out from Kirby, because it's always so interesting to me, because he's really closed off to us most of the time. So what's he really like is always our question. And we finally get to hear what he's really like and kind of confirm some things that we thought we knew about Kirby Smart. So what stood out for me from the interviews this week, Dom Lovett stands up there and how do you get Kirby Smart to like you? And he said, you got to be tough. And I thought that part, especially as a wide receiver, you've got to show him that you are tough. That's how you get him on your side. And Tate Rattler said, he can pull that out of somebody.
Yeah, no prima donnas, right? That's what Dom said. You got to come in there wanting to be a football player first, a receiver second. And you saw that with Dom and Arian. And I don't know that we really did a good enough job this last season really paying tribute to the job that Dom and Arian did as gunners on that punt team. 2 years, 23 yards in punt returns they allowed. I mean, that's really incredible, the job that they did in that Georgia special team. Say, well, maybe that doesn't matter. Well, yeah, it does, because we found that out against Notre Dame when they had that kick return for a touchdown. I thought that was enlightening too. Talking to Xavier Watts, asking him where that game turned, he said the kick return. I'd always thought it was the Stockton fumble. Notre Dame looked at it different. But to your point, these players, I guess what stands out to me, Cody, is just, their thanks and appreciation for what they went through at Georgia. They're glad they signed up for Kirby. They're glad they fought through it. They're very defensive of their coaches. We started to ask questions about the coaches. They're like, no, that's on us. Failure to execute. We were coached to do the right things. I like that accountability from the Georgia football players. Nobody was making any excuses. I think there was a pride factor for winning the SEC championship. Again, I know that the season didn't end like a lot of Georgia fans wished it would have, but there's 15 other teams that wish they could say they were SEC champions. And the guys, to a man, were really proud of the resiliency they showed and the way they fought back from a lot of tough times and a really difficult schedule to win that SEC championship. That banner's always going to be there, Cody.
Yeah, Dom Lovett was so interesting to me because you talk about Kirby Smart, and he talked about the toughness, but he actually played in two different programs, right? So transferred from Missouri, so he has kind of an outside perspective as well, which not all the guys who are just played at Georgia the whole time, they think that's how college football is. But it was so interesting to hear Dom talk about the difference between playing other places and at Georgia. He said, yeah, there's being in shape and there's being in Georgia shape, and it kind of hit him in the face pretty quickly.
Yeah, we were talking about microphone stories, and he was saying about how Kirby jumped him about being in shape. He said, I am in shape, but I'm just not in Georgia shape yet. And, ETN kind of said the same thing, with the standard at Georgia being the standard, and why he picked Georgia, because he knew what he was going to get coming in, and he got those challenges to get better. And yeah, he had some injuries, but you go back and you look at Trevor Etienne with 5 touchdowns against Texas. I mean, I don't think Georgia wins the SEC without Trevor Etienne. You put it like that. I also thought it was interesting talking to Tate Ratledge about Carson Beck and him saying that he expects Carson to bounce back and that he did have an off year. Maybe he's misunderstood. Always interesting to get that teammate perspective from within on the players and on the coaching staff.
Yeah, so we talked about what we learned about Kirby Smart, but you had great insights about the 2024 season, things that, whether it was Michael Williams was injured the whole year, we didn't find out, officially until the combine, that he didn't practice until the Texas game. Talk about Carson Beck and Tate Ratledge, and you had a great question to Tate, because Tate was the guy, he and Carson were so tight, especially early on in their career. Literally, Carson Beck was the guy that cut the mullet for Tate Ratledge. That's how close those guys are. So it was interesting to hear Tate talk about how, hey, I know how to talk to Carson. And it was because we saw Kirby all year, and everybody was wondering, why is Kirby so, soft, with Carson Beck? Why has he got the kid gloves on when he's dealing with Carson Beck? And Tate kind of echoed that. He said, you've got to be able to talk to Carson the right way, or you'll lose him. And so it was interesting to hear somebody else kind of confirm that, yes, you needed to treat Carson a certain way to get the best out of him.
Well, a talented guy to be, for sure. And again, you can't take credit away from Carson Beck. He really turned it on there late against Tennessee, Georgia Tech, a lot of clutch plays. But yeah, I mean, not your typical Georgia quarterback leader. I mean, the fact that, Tate Ratledge was the offensive captain instead of the quarterback, usually that leadership position comes with the quarterback. But, there were some pitfalls for Carson, and, obviously the NIL stuff, probably a little bit of a distraction. We heard Arian Smith tell us that, he was driving an 05 Toyota the first couple of years, maybe not like some of the other guys. So you wonder a little bit about how that related. And of course, you remember, Kirby Smart saying he kind of wished Carson would have worked a little bit more with the receivers, one of those unintended consequences of NIL, Cody. But I think Carson will be the better for it as he goes to Miami. And I think Georgia will be the better for it. I think there was a lot of people that watched and learned as far as some of the things that were happening earlier in the year that might have been a little bit of a distraction, might have taken a player away from the team a little bit more than you would like. So I don't necessarily think that's going to be an issue with Ryan Puglisi and Gunnar Stockton in terms of, them jetting off somewhere else or maybe not putting the team first. I think we're going to see plenty of that this summer, but certainly last year, there were plenty of storylines. And at the end of the day, even with all those storylines, even with all those distractions, even with all those injuries, even with that godforsaken schedule, the Georgia Bulldogs were still the SEC champions. And I thought that they had a really good year. When all said and done, I think there'll be an appreciation for this 2024 Georgia team and the way they fought and the way they carried the flag and planted it right there in Texas. This was supposed to be the year, Texas took over, and Georgia didn't just beat them once, they beat them twice.
Oh, yeah, they did. And we heard one funny thing that came out from Trevor Etienne. You asked him a Cash Jones story. He said he remembers when he gave the horns down. And, because we talked about how unusual it was that Georgia never did that, like after they beat Texas. But that stuck out in his mind, which tells you how kind of off the radar. And it was interesting. Talk about Texas. You got to talk to Andrew McCuba, who played at Texas. Of course, you talked to Xavier Watts from Notre Dame. So it's always great for you, too, to get that outside perspective of what everybody sees when they're preparing to play Georgia or when they play Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, you got to give Makuba credit. I mean, that was one whale of a hit on Gunnar Stockton. It was not targeting. It was a clean hit. I mean, I don't know that I've ever seen a guy get hit that hard, and I've certainly never seen a guy get hit that hard and hold on to the ball like Gunnar did. I'm pretty sure he was knocked unconscious based on some of the still shots where it looked like the eyes were rolled back in the head. Yet he's got that ball tight. You know, if he fumbles, like Makuba said, if he fumbles, Texas wins that game. And to me, that was one of the moments of the 2024 season that showed that determination and that grit when you've got that backup quarterback coming in off the bench and, you know, he just makes this kamikaze run and just takes an incredible hit. You see the shoulder lead right there from Makuba. I mean, what a shot. But look at that. Gunnar holding on to that football, really saving the day. And then one play later, Carson comes in there with one arm and hands off to ETN. You know, I talked to Jared Wilson. He said, I didn't even know Carson was in the huddle. I didn't pay attention. I didn't know who I was snapping to. So it's kind of interesting to know just how locked in Georgia was when they played those Texas Longhorns. And the players told me they knew they were the underdog. You know, they say that they play them all the same, but you can't convince me that the Bulldogs didn't have a chip on their shoulder, knowing they were going to go in as an underdog against Texas in both of those football games, find a way to win. Again, Xavier Watts thought it was very interesting. I asked him, when did that game turn? And he said he thought it was the kickoff return in the second half. Remember, that took it from 13-3 to 20-3, made it very difficult for Georgia to play call. They had to get a little bit more one-dimensional, and it gave Notre Dame the luxury of being balanced on offense. When you've got that kind of a lead, you can run clock. And let's face it, Riley Leonard was playing his best football at the end of the year. Notre Dame didn't make many mistakes. So there were just a couple of those outlier plays, whether it was a fumble inside the 10 or the fumble at the end of the half, a kickoff return. You say, boy, those were three just catastrophic plays that went against Georgia, and you kind of understand. I thought Watts also said that he thought Stockton threw the ball really well. He knew Notre Dame knew that Gunnar could run the football, more physical runner than most quarterbacks. I know Gunnar didn't do a lot running in the game, but that was by plan. Notre Dame had a plan for Gunnar Stockton running the football. So interesting to get those insights from opposing players for sure.
Yeah, you talked about all the Georgia players. They were very proud of the resiliency that they all kept mentioning it, that they showed, they felt like during that 2024 season, although they all acknowledged that there were shortcomings, right? Whether it was Trevor Etienne, they asked him, hey, the running numbers weren't up there. He said, hey, to be honest, we played from behind, but I'll put it on my eyes. And, I wasn't able to find the right hole. You talked to Tate Ratledge and said, is it Stacey Searles? Is he the problem? He said, no, it's us and what we're doing and the little things. So a lot of those guys did take accountability, which is crazy. Again, it's crazy to say the SEC champions had to take accountability for their shortcomings.
Yeah, I mean, it just shows you where the standard's at with Kirby Smart. You got to be careful with that. You can't call it a bad year when you win the SEC championship and make it to the college football playoff. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It was a bad day in New Orleans. There was a lot of tragedy around that game, from the terrorist attack to, the unfortunate circumstances with Kirby's family and then just the bad breaks in the game. It was a dark day for Georgia football. There's no doubt about that. It's been a minute since we've seen a season end with a loss. And yet and still, you get the feeling that the next class is working hard and growing right now, and that fire is lit. I mean, these guys understand. I don't know that there's any first-round picks on next year's team. There's a lot of young guys that are going to have to grow quickly and mature into roles for Georgia to compete for the SEC championship again, Cody.
Yeah, you and I were kind of talking off air this weekend about who will be at the Combine next year, and there's a good list of names who could be at the Combine. But I don't know that there's going to be 3 first-rounders when you start looking at that list, at least at this point. But again, Jalen Walker talked about in his interview, I had a plan going into my junior season how I can become a top pick in the NFL draft. But you talked about 2025 and how that is all forming right now. The other part of getting to talk to these guys on their way out is who they want to mention on the way back. And some guys do want to call out players who they have a lot of respect for, and some don't. I'll start with one that just kind of stood out because a lot of guys will say everybody else in their room, right? All the other running backs. I love all the other running backs. But Smile Munden, when you asked him, one of the guys that came out was Jaden Riddell, the tight end, who we didn't see a ton of. And I think a Georgia tight end's coming up this season. I think a Lawson Lucky and Oscar Delp, yes. And then there's so much hype about the freshmen who are coming in. That's Ethan Barbour and Elias Williams. that Jaden Riddell's kind of stuck in the middle, but Smile Munden wouldn't have thrown that name out there if he hadn't been a thorn in his side at some point in practice this year, because he's like, that guy's special. And that got me excited.
Yeah, he said it twice. He said it at the Senior Bowl, and he said it again at the Combine. So I think he's got his money on Riddell. I mean, this is a really athletic tight end, pass catcher kind of guy. Again, everybody's going to get compared to Brock Bowers. That's so unfair. But this is a guy that I think can really move, that's very athletic, that could be on the verge of that breakout. And, Lawson Lucky, too. I mean, Lawson was a guy that could catch the ball really effectively. And, Oscar Delp's not sliced bread. I mean, this is a guy that's going to get drafted in the NFL. So you've got 3 NFL tight ends. And you mentioned the freshmen. We'll see how long it takes, for them to kind of get their fit in the program. But when you've got a room that's that deep, it tells me Georgia's going to stay in that double tight end. And that's so important because there's so many different things you can do out of that double tight end formation in terms of the versatility it gives you to run the ball or throw it. These guys are very difficult matchups. There's not a lot of teams that have the caliber of linebackers and safeties to match up with them. And then, of course, talking to ETN, he couldn't say enough about Nate Frazier. He said he's him. And that's exciting to know. We saw Nate do some good things. Remember, he came in late. He didn't even go through spring. So I think you could see an even bigger jump from Nate Frazier. And who knows, maybe even an all-SEC kind of season.
All right. Ty Ingram Dawkins, we heard from him. And it was interesting because he's a guy who's kind of trying to work his way up draft boards. And he talked about when he first got to Georgia. He said, I was a 5-star coming in. I had, I was highly lauded, but there was some welcome to Georgia moments that I had, and it was hard for me. I had to learn how to get beat during reps and come back because I just won every rep I ever had coming out of high school. And so you had kind of that from Ty Ingram Dawkins. And then we also heard from Warren Brinson, and Brinson was asked about who he thought was going to be one of the guys popping off, and he actually mentioned an incoming 5-star defensive tackle, and that's Elijah Griffin, of course, out of Savannah. Warren Brinson also from Savannah, so they've known each other a long time. But Brinson said, I'm hearing good things about it. But it got me all excited about Elijah Griffin, thinking a 5-star defensive tackle could make an impact as a freshman. But then I heard Ty Ingram Dawkins go, yeah, there was definitely a learning curve coming in as a 5-star incoming defensive tackle. So do you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt a little bit, what Warren Brinson's hyping up Elijah Griffin, although he says he's hearing good things?
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily. I mean, a lot of it has to do with your competition level, but yeah, Griffin's the real deal. I mean, I think he was the best defensive line recruit in the country, and he's going to have some opportunities. You think back to how Jalen Carter contributed, and, he had the benefit of Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt ahead of him. And there's going to be some depth there with Christian Miller coming back, and obviously Big Baby, another guy that Warren Brinson feels good about. So you've got some dudes there in the middle. I don't know about the whole havoc maker train record thing. I do think Griffin is cut out in that mold. I do think you're going to see some Georgia guys emerge in that front seven that maybe we're not talking a lot about. In addition to, look, C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson. I mean, I don't know if there's a better linebacker duo coming back in the SEC in terms of the experience and the toughness and the run-stopping ability. Another guy we haven't mentioned yet, and he broke out last year, but maybe even bigger things this year, is KJ Bolden. Right. I mean, KJ did a heck of a job for a true freshman. He really graded out ahead of Malachi in a lot of those games. So I'm expecting big things from him as well. I think that Georgia secondary, Cody, is going to be pretty strong.
Yeah, Malachi was very happy to pour some love on KJ Bolden as well. One of the other guys we asked about his successor was Jared Wilson and Drew Bobo, and he's like, some people say Drew's not big enough. I'm telling you, he's gotten bigger, which is good to hear. And he seemed very confident in what Drew Bobo can do stepping into that center position.
Yeah, so the offensive line, just talking to the linemen in general, they weren't calling out big, we all know Michael Morris is about ready to step up. We know Ernest Green's going to be healthy. But the thing they said was this is going to be a very big line. And Xavier Truss's comment on Stacey Searles was, this is a guy that can light a fire under your ass. And that was what he said, quote unquote. And that's important to know that Coach Searles has that motivational ability. Again, I know the offensive line didn't have the type of season that we're accustomed to, but you've got to look at the circumstances. Georgia was playing from behind a lot more than they typically have. That makes it a lot harder to play call. The defense wasn't as dominant as it's been throughout the season. Kirby had to coach up. The bottom of that roster, that defense was a work in progress all year long. It got better and better and better, but it didn't give the offense the advantages that it maybe had in the Stetson Bennett years with the automatic 3-and-outs and the great field position and shutting down quarterbacks or shutting people out for 3 quarters. Last year's Georgia offense didn't have that benefit. I do think that the injuries this year also had something to do with that. I remember Kirby telling us that at some point every starting offensive lineman missed a week of practice. I think a lot of that had to do with the schedule and how physical and difficult it was. Got to think that that offensive line is going to take a step forward. And it always, to me, keeps coming back to the quarterback. Feel like running back's going to be solid. Feel like you brought in some good receivers. Looks like the offensive line's going to reload quickly. What's going to happen at the quarterback position, and how dominant can that defensive front be to make teams one-dimensional, having to throw the ball to move it?
Yeah, you're talking about the injuries on the offensive line. We talked to Tate Ratledge because we talked about it on this show quite a bit. He missed the Senior Bowl. Why'd he miss the Senior Bowl? And he said, I was injured up through the Senior Bowl, which tells you, he never really had that tightrope surgery during the year. He was never really all the way quite back, even until after the season.
Yeah, you had a lot of guys playing with bumps and bruises. I mean, I think we saw that, and, maybe not at 100%, but, that's why Tate didn't go. He said, I felt like I was just getting healthy, didn't want to re-injure myself after that rehab right before the draft process. I get that. Understood. It was good to see Tate run. I thought him and Jared both had really good combines, very athletic players in the Georgia mold. Should be another draft with double-digit Georgia players selected, Cody. Great advertisement for Kirby Smart as well as the SEC. I'm sure they'll lead the nation in draft picks once again.
Yeah, and we'll get to see all those guys perform one more time on Pro Days right around the corner, March 12th. We will all be in Athens that day to see what the Dogs and some of the Dogs who didn't get to go to the Combine, Chaz Chambliss, Dan Jackson, what they've got for the NFL scouts on that day as well. All right, we're going to take our first break here on The Beat. When we come back, Mike sits down with SEC Network analyst Chris Doering. They're going to hit a little bit of everything from the world of college football, talking salary cap, talking spring games, and also who's the team to beat in the SEC coming up in 2025. All of that coming up right after the break. This is On The Beat, presented by Ingles.
So, you going to play this week?
You gonna play this week?
You going to play this week?
You gonna play this week?
You going to play this
You
week?
gonna play this week? You gonna play this week?
You going to play this week?
You gonna play this week? This week?
And welcome to the Ingles Game of the Week as the Warhorses square off against the rival.
He's going in.
He's going in. Go, baby!
Ingles. We're with you every step of the way.
Every week here on The Beat during the football season, we get Mike's 30,000-foot view to just see what everything else is going on around the SEC. You're a veteran of this league for many decades, Mike, but I thought, we were able to bump it up even another notch today as you got to sit down with Chris Doering from the SEC Network.
Well, as promised, Chris Doering joined us from the SEC Network. Chris, really good to see you again, man. I know you're finally getting a break. It was good to see you last week in Gainesville. Of course, it was year 4 of the Steve Spurrier Awards, and folks may not know it, but you kind of underwrite that with your mortgage company down there in Gainesville. I guess I'd start out by letting folks know, or giving you the opportunity to let folks know why you do that for Coach Spurrier.
Well, let me actually make sure I turn the credit to you as well. Yeah, this was your idea, and I still remember standing in the backyard in Gainesville there and hearing your proposal about what we needed to do to honor Coach Spurrier. And what it's grown into in just 4 years is pretty impressive. It's a relatively small group of folks with you and I and Tricia kind of running that thing. And to see the buy-in from the sponsors, what we've done to turn this into a national award, attracting folks like Man Cave Health and the Prostate Cancer Foundation to be sponsors. It's such a great tie-in with what we're doing here, shining a light on all that's good about college football and certainly on Coach Spurrier, who, I think he's easily a Mount Rushmore in the SEC coach. And you look around college football today, so much of what he was doing, even dating back to Duke before he was at Florida, where I played for him in the 90s, revolutionizing college football, offensive football in general, the passing game. It's just a lot of fun to see how his fingerprints have permeated throughout the world of college football in general.
Yeah, no doubt. It was cool to see, Marcus Freeman there, and Fran Brown, a former Kirby assistant, was there as well. He was actually the award winner. You got another one of these guys off the Kirby tree. You look at Sam Pittman, Shane Beamer was there, another guy that coached under Kirby. It's interesting to me to see the influence that Kirby's had. And, even at the Combine last week, you hear so much about Georgia now. I really didn't hear as much about Alabama. It's kind of, the stage is kind of set with Georgia. Marcus Freeman, obviously Notre Dame played Georgia. There were so many tie-ins. And to your point, to have that stage with so many of the coaches in one spot. Dabo Swinney, right? Dabo was there, and man, he put on a show. It's just fun to have these guys in person and really really glad to work with you on that. I want to kind of turn my attention ahead to some of the college football issues that we're dealing with, and some of these court cases are going to be settled. We're hearing so much about a salary cap. I mean, it's just all happening so fast. It was just yesterday. It's like, oh, players can get paid NIL money, and now everything's progressing so quickly where we're talking about each school having a certain amount of money allotted for NIL dealings. And Chris, how do you do that? If it's 21 million, how much goes to football? Is there, is Title IX a part of this? I mean, how do you slice this pie up?
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's a kind of an overwhelming question that you ask. I think everybody's kind of trying to figure it out as we go. But I think folks have this idea that it's going to even the playing field. But to your point, like, schools are going to have the ability to divvy up that money in any different way they want. Some may allocate it all to football. Others are giving it to some of the other sports. So I don't know that it's going to create an even playing field, especially since you'll still have the ability to have name, image, and likeness stuff. And I actually talked to Josh Brooks about this on our show the other day. They're going to still do the investigations to make sure it's a legitimate name, image, and likeness deal. But what's to stop, a Haslam at Tennessee from doling out a ton of money for the next great quarterback in an NIL deal on top of, what's being allocated from the salary cap. So I think they need some more structure. Obviously, I think we're working in that direction. But as I mentioned, the other night on at the stage there, like, everybody in the offseason last year was so upset about transfer portal and the name, image, and likeness money that's being spent, and people jumping around all over the place, and how college football is changing. And then we have the season kickoff, and it's the best season we've had in my lifetime. I can't remember a more exciting college football season with games that really mattered, starting in October, where we were having elimination games every week. It was a lot of fun. So hopefully you can get the off-field stuff figured out, but the product on the field right now is pretty impressive.
Yeah, it is. One of the things that's been happening lately trend-wise, and I guess it started with Nebraska's Matt Rule when he canceled the spring game, and we've seen some other schools follow suit. What are your thoughts on why are these spring games being canceled, and is this a good thing?
I understand why they're doing it. I know they don't want to let everybody see the players that are emerging and potentially, I think one of the things that you hear a lot about still is roster tampering. So, if somebody goes out there, has a big spring game on television, and, all of a sudden he's getting hit up through back channel communication lines, and now you're potentially losing one of your emerging stars. So I understand it. I don't like it. I thought for me, Mike, the spring practice and spring game specifically was big for my progression in terms of it's the only way you can kind of replicate what it's like to go through the game day process when you haven't necessarily done it before, and you're getting a chance to have the fans come there, and you're feeling a little bit more pressure. So I thought it was always really beneficial for me and for my teammates, particularly early in your career. But I understand why it's going that way, and from a broadcaster standpoint, I hate it because I've enjoyed calling spring games the last few years. I enjoy getting a sneak peek at what a team's going to look like. And it just seems like all these coaches are trying to hold the cards as close to the vest as they possibly can.
Yeah, I understand that. I get that. And but to your point, I do think there's something to be said for these coaches that want to see who can perform, under the lights in front of a crowd. I think that's probably why Georgia's still doing it. I know they're still having their G-Day game. You want to see what Gunnar Stockton and Ryan Puglisi can do with the crowd. And probably there's some players that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but don't some players play a little better in front of the crowd maybe than they do in practices?
Very much so. I think there's certainly such thing as gamers. And this is an old reference, but you just saw this guy last Monday. Shane Matthews was fifth on the depth chart in 1990 before the spring game, and he went out there and lit it up, and some of the other guys didn't. And it got him kind of noticed and continued to progress on to where he ended up being the starter at the beginning of that fall. So I do think that there's a lot of value. I hope that there's a way to kind of keep the spring game, at least in a landscape that's changing so fast. I hope that we can keep some of the tradition. And spring games are a great tradition, particularly here in the SEC. And fans love getting that little taste of their team at this time of year.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, spring games, they do hold a place in college football tradition. I think they're healthy. I think it's healthy for the players. It's a fan's opportunity to kind of get a preview of what they're seeing. When we look ahead, Chris, to next season, it's been 3 years now, I guess 2 years since Georgia won a national title. That's the last time that the SEC won a national championship. And I still don't have any question whether or not the SEC is the best conference in the country. In fact, a lot of the Georgia players were saying, hey, it's tougher to win an SEC championship than a national title, right? We heard Spurrier calling out fans that were saying Georgia had a bad year, said, man, forget that. Kirby Smart won an SEC title. That's the second hardest thing to do in college football behind win a national title. And Ryan Day had to have 2 do-overs, as he said, right? Lost that game to Michigan and didn't play in their conference championship, finished 4th in the Big Ten, still won a title. Where do you sit as far as the difficulty of winning the SEC compared to winning the national title? And what do you think is going to happen with these conference championship games now with this expanded playoff?
Yeah, you're hitting all the sensitive spots for me because I'm a huge fan of the SEC championship game. I obviously had a chance to play in the first 4 of them and really experienced what it was like for this conference, what it meant to get to go to Atlanta, having the chance to say you're a Southeastern Conference football champion or any sport is pretty impressive. And so I hope that there's a way to retain that. I do kind of like the idea of maybe making it a whole weekend of a couple different games, maybe some play-in games as we talk about, the SEC and the Big Ten potentially getting 4 guaranteed spots in the playoff. I hate that idea, Mikey, because it just seems to me like you want to get the best teams. And I do think, I think if Alabama or Ole Miss or South Carolina last year get in, I think they win some games, but I do think it should be earned. Now, the good thing about it is we're hearing if they do go to those guaranteed spots that we may get a 9-game conference schedule, which would be something I'd be for. I hate that Florida doesn't play Auburn anymore. Auburn was one of my favorite opponents when I was a kid and playing at Florida too. So I'd like to see the SEC playing each other more frequently. But I do think that we got to retain some of the tradition, and the SEC championship game there in Atlanta is one of the most important things I think we got to keep in the fabric of this league.
Yeah, I guess one of the tough things about that 9-game schedule is, Florida's still playing Florida State at the end of the year. Georgia's still playing Georgia Tech, and South Carolina's still playing Clemson. Do you have any answers for the attrition the SEC seems to suffer? I mean, these teams really cannibalized each other, it seems like the last 2 years, Chris.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing that. I think we're seeing it in basketball too. You look at how difficult this league has been in both of those sports. And by the time you get to the end of the season, you're pretty wore out, both physically and mentally. So I do think that's a concern. I also think that, I'm all for the reseeding. I think we saw, how glaringly bad that was this past year. And I go back and I look at Georgia, like to some degree, wouldn't you almost rather have a shorter layoff? Like I don't like the idea of having it be so long after the regular season or the conference championship game. I think there were some teams that definitely lost a little bit of momentum. So I'd like to see how they would compress the schedule a little bit. I think going as late as it did, I think it lost a little bit of the luster. But I think there's going to be some good tweaks coming forth, and I do think the SEC. I agree with you, man. And I'm not buying this story about the Big Ten going to take over for the SEC just because of all the money that they have from their alumni bases up in the Northeast.
Yeah, no, I don't either. And to your point, all those teams that got a bye in the playoff, each one of them lost.
Yep.
Maybe there was something to that. Kirby pointed out a couple times it was a case of the better team winning, but maybe a couple times it wasn't as well. Teams maybe not quite as sharp with that extra time off. Before I let you go, CD, looking into next season, we all know Arch Manning's going to be under center for the Texas Longhorns. Seeing, hearing the drums beat a lot for Texas. Are they the preseason favorite? And what do you think is ahead for the Georgias and the Alabamas, the Ole Misses, and now the Floridas with DJ Lagway?
Yeah, I mean, I have to imagine that Texas is the favorite, given the fact that the conference schedule just flips. It was an absolute joke, how much more difficult, Georgia's schedule was than Texas's, or Florida's was last year than Texas. So they're going to benefit from having that same sort of conference run as they did last year. And I think everybody's excited about seeing what Arch Manning can do. I don't really see there being any drop-off for Georgia. I mean, they continue to recruit extremely well as long as Kirby's the head coach there. I think they keep that train on the tracks. But I am interested, I think they, like everybody else, are affected by the lack of depth. And you saw that at times last year, particularly on the defensive line. So I think it's now more than ever, it's important to be able to retain the players on your roster, something that Kirby had done so well. He was kind of the last to be affected by it in recent years. But it truly is a very important thing to be able to have that kind of depth that you need to go through this conference schedule and have to deal with inevitable injuries that'll pop up.
Chris, I do want to ask one question. Just kind of came to mind, going to the combine and seeing what some of the guys did. Some of the guys, Dan Jackson, not getting invited. I know you were at the Senior Bowl. You saw what he did there. I know Arian Smith, he ran a 4.36. He didn't set the record. I want to zero in on you. Where did you get drafted? How important is the combine, and what is the message for guys like Arian Smith that may not be going in the top 2 or 3 rounds?
Man, it is such a different world now than it was when I was coming out, and the way that these guys train. I mean, it's so crazy, Mike, because you're talking about guys that were at the Senior Bowl that are in the middle of their prep, getting ready for the combine, which is a totally different type of training. What you're doing to get ready to go out there to run the 40s, to run the short shuttles and the vertical jump. That's a very different training than what you do for season preparation. So, we didn't have the luxury of having those academies to go to. You kind of just figured it out on your own. And this is, Mike, how much I put into eating right now and training and recovery. I didn't have any of that knowledge back then. So I go to the combine. I'm sitting in the hot tub with Danny Cannell and the rest of the quarterbacks. Like the worst thing you can do the night before you run, zap the legs. I did not perform very well at the combine. I think everybody was already suspect of my speed. And then I go out there and have a poor time, even though I came back at Pro Day in Gainesville and ran 4.58. They already solidified in their heads that I was slow. So I didn't end up getting drafted. Mel Kiper had me going in the 3rd or 4th round. I ended up going in the 6th round. I think I was I want to say I was the 25th or 28th receiver taken. I wasn't even the first white receiver, Mikey. So that was insulting to me as well. But it was disappointing. But in 10 years in the NFL, I got cut 10 different times. I moved 22 different times across the country. So it was a life of a lot of unsettledness, but it was one that I look at it from the bright side, man. I got a chance to play with some amazing players, man. Marshall Faulk, Jerome Bettis, Hines Ward. It's so many great players that I've had an opportunity to get to be friends with, learn from, and being in a bunch of different schemes too. That's really benefited me in terms of my broadcasting career and being exposed to lots of different types of coaching. So I'm grateful for the path. It wasn't the one that I necessarily expected, but it was a very fulfilling 10-year period, man.
Well, I think everybody's pretty happy that you've been with the SEC Network for a while. You do a great job anchoring that Saturday night show. We really enjoy your commentary. Really appreciate you being a friend of DawgNation. Really appreciate you being my friend. It's been fun doing the Spurrier Award. We'll keep that rolling. There'll be a Georgia connection coming soon. I know Brock Bowers was our first ever Player of the Year, and he wasn't able to come in person because he'd had surgery that year on his shoulder. And, talking to his mom, she's like, one of these days he wants to get down there. So one way or another, we'll wedge Brock Bowers into that Steve Spurrier Award show. Maybe, who knows, maybe next year or the year after before he gets too big for us, CD. I think Brock Bowers might be headed for a gold jacket in the NFL.
There's no question about that, man. How fun was it to watch maybe the 2 most impactful rookies last year being SEC guys, Georgia guys, and Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey. So it's been fun to get to follow these guys, and certainly as they go on in their professional careers, man. I think the best advertisement for Georgia football was watching that Philadelphia Eagles defense this year, man. They were fun to watch, and primarily made up of a lot of those guys that used to wear red and black.
No doubt about it. Chris, thank you very much. I look forward to having you on the show again soon.
Sounds good, Mike. Thanks, man.
All right, back to you, Cody.
Really good stuff right there, and it is never really an official episode of On the Beat if we don't get one Philly Dogs reference in there. Appreciate Chris Doering for joining us here on the Beat. When we come back, we are going to talk a little Georgia basketball because, yes, it's March, and the Dogs are still relevant in the hunt for the NCAA tournament. Before we do that, though, I want to say thank you to the Finish Long Drink for being a part of our program today. As the weather gets a little bit warmer, starting to pack your cooler and head out to events, whether it's ball games or the golf course or wherever you're going, well, when you go, how about a pre-made cocktail in a can for you? That's what you get with the Finish Long Drink. You have the traditional citrus flavor, the zero sugar citrus flavor, the cranberry, or the peach-flavored Finish Long Drink. Again, it is a ready-to-drink, convenient option for you and any occasion. It blends citrus flavors with a hint of sweetness, offering a crisp and refreshing taste unlike any other. It's been a staple in Finland for decades, and it is gaining popularity, especially among our DawgNation faithful. Brandon Adams, Kaylee Mansell, they are all big fans of the Finish Long Drink. Nothing quite goes with a round of golf like a Finish Long Drink, so get it in that cooler on the side of your golf cart as you head out and hit the links later on this spring. All right, we are back on the beat, and as we start to wrap things up, we got to hit one more big thing because, yes, the calendar has turned to March. And, Mike, you've been kind of beating the drum for don't give up on this Georgia basketball team. Don't give up on this Georgia basketball team. Well, they knock off number 3 Florida last week, and then they knock off Texas this past weekend, and they are right there in the hunt to make the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I mean, as the taping of the show, you know, they're one of the last 4 in, which would mean they play a play-in game, but there's still 2 games left, and these are big games, Cody, and Josh Brooks knows it, and that's why he said, you know what, guys, don't bother with the day back in Athens. We're just going to send you right from Athens to Columbia, South Carolina. You got that Tuesday night game against the Gamecocks, and, you know, the Gamecocks are last in the SEC. They've only won 2 league games. Problem is, it's been 2 of their last 3 games they've won at home over some good competition. You know, able to knock off Arkansas by double digits, and then a pretty good win again over, I believe it was A&M they might have beat at home, but they're playing, no, that was Vanderbilt to beat them, but they're playing really good basketball right now. And it's not that it's a win that would help Georgia with quad 1 variety, but you don't want to lose this game on the road to a bottom dweller like South Carolina. It would hurt your resume. So kind of a must win. You don't want to ugly up your resume. And then you got Vandy at home next Saturday. You know, Commodores have won 3 straight. Right now, they're entrenched in the field. I think they're 1 win away from really locking themselves in. So they've got something to play for Saturday in Athens. It's obviously a big game for Georgia as well. If they could beat Vanderbilt, maybe they move up in the pecking order. You know, SEC tournament next week in Nashville, you really don't want to go there having to do some work. I feel like if the Dogs win the next 2 games, I mean, I feel like they're a lock to get in. Win 1 of the next 2, pretty good chance, but might need to win 1 or 2 in Nashville. But to your point, can't overlook how big it was to beat the Florida Gators and to come back and travel on the road and beat Texas. I mean, this is a team that had lost 9 of 11 games. These were all quad 1 losses, pretty much all top 25 teams. But still, when you lose 9 of 11, it can really rip your soul. It can cause problems in the locker room. It can lead to finger pointing or questioning your coaches. The fact that Mike White has kept these guys engaged against what has historically been the most difficult schedule Georgia basketball has ever played, the best league college basketball has ever seen. And here's Georgia fighting for a spot in the NCAA tournament. It would be the first time in 10 years, Cody, if they could get in this tournament. They're right on the brink. Their net ranking, computer ranking, 33rd. I mean, that's awful doggone good when you take a look around the landscape and consider the schedule that the Bulldogs have played. So big props to Asa Newell. Blue Kane has done a great job. Silas Demery Jr., Godfrey. They got a lot of guys that are pouring in there. Dakota LeFew that are getting it done right now, making names for themselves, trying to change the narrative for Georgia basketball.
Yeah, and then if you get in the postseason, right, you've played in a postseason. It was last year in the NIT, but a nice little run right there. I'll tell you the thing that got me excited, the Florida game, the way it ended, because Georgia has flirted with knocking off these big teams. They had Auburn. They were toe-to-toe with Auburn for a long time, just couldn't finish the drill. They finally finished one, and after kind of swung the other way against Florida, and then you go and prove that you can win on the road. So I love how you said it. It's really not a must-win, but you don't want to lose against South Carolina. Just keep proving that you can win away from Stegman Coliseum, and then I feel great about this team when they get inside their own building.
Yeah, you know, they'll look at the net ranking, you know, is one of the things the tournament selection committee will look at. They'll look at the quad 1 record. Georgia has not lost a game outside of quad 1, but they're also going to look at the momentum that they finish with. And right now, the Dogs with 2 straight wins, you know, for the first time since the first week of the season, again, you just have to look at the difficulty of this SEC. If they can finish out winning 3 out of 4 or 4 straight, maybe pick up 1 win in Nashville, this is an NCAA tournament team. We know they're that caliber. We know they're that good. They also beat St. John's, another really good team, earlier this season. Now you got that win over Florida. Played Auburn really close. You don't get points for that in the metrics, but we saw how close they played the Auburn Tigers, the number one team in the country. I mean, Mike White seems to have these guys peaking at just the right time.
Yeah, what a fun time. We got, we're talking Combine, Pro Day, and spring practice are going to kick off coming up next week. You got potential basketball team going, to the tournament if they can take care of business. And Georgia baseball, winning in walk-off fashion a couple times last week. It is really a fun – spring has always been a fun time to be on campus in Athens because traditionally the Olympic sports too, whether it's, tennis or golf or gymnastics have all been getting to the playoffs as well and doing their thing. So it is a great time to be a Dog, is it not?
No doubt about it. A lot of momentum. Josh Brooks has gotten a lot done in his 4 years. When you look at those facilities, you look at West, the Wizard Johnson, and the baseball team, 10-1. Top 10 team. They've got Omaha written all over them. You look at the softball program, they're in the top 10. They're off to a really good start. You talk about the track program and what they've been doing. So I think things are as good as they've been across the board for Georgia. Of course, we always make our read off football. I still think SEC championship season was tremendous, Cody. The fact that the Dogs were able to fight their way back. I know they had that tough loss to Bama and ugly loss at Ole Miss, but the fact they were able to hold that streak against Tennessee, against Florida, beat Texas twice, a really good Texas team, by the way, reached the college football playoff, and now put 14 guys at the combine, double-digit guys drafted. Things are good at Georgia, right? And I know people have been spoiled by those titles. You just can't win it every year. You won back-to-back in the playoff era. Nobody else did that. We'll see what Kirby's got in store for this fall. We know there's a lot of competition within the ranks. And I think Georgia goes in as a little bit of an underdog. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects the offseason preparation over there at Butts-Mehre Heritage Hall.
Yeah, because we heard Chris Doering on this show talk about it. Yeah, everybody's going to want to talk about Arch Manning in Texas. Georgia gets to fly in under the radar, and let's go get him. It's only March, right? I got to calm down. Keep it here. We'll get here come August, right?
You win that home opener, and you set a brand new record for the most consecutive home wins. That would be 32 in a row. I haven't lost at home since 2019. So, the glass is more than half full.
All right. How about you, Mike? Are you going to stay put now? Or you got more traveling you got to do? Are you going to be in town for a minute?
Yeah, for a minute, and then we'll head up to Nashville with the Bulldogs. Obviously Mike White is, this Georgia basketball team has really proven themselves, and, certainly DawgNation, we try to travel as much or more than really anybody else out there with our resources. Again, I was so impressed Kaylee was there all week with that camera and all those interviews that are free on DawgNation's YouTube page, all the stories we wrote. Of course, Jack Leo did a great job keeping us up to date with all the results stories. I know Connor Riley's going to be plugged in with Pro Day coming in. Of course, every day, DawgNation Daily with Brandon Adams. I don't know anything BA doesn't have an opinion on. Say that. So he's going to be spitting fire for the next week as well. But I'll stick around here for a bit, and we'll dig in with a little Georgia baseball, a little Georgia basketball. Spring football be here before you know it.
Yeah, we will be all over it as well. And I love, like when we got that team coverage going on, there's nothing specialer than when DawgNation really has it going. We may be in Dayton. We may be in another first-round site. That would be a whole lot of fun this year. All right, appreciate it, Mike. We will catch up with you next week. We'll talk more of everything going on the beat. It's presented by Ingles.